In today's episode, we're going to take this boring and dull bedroom scene and transform it into something cool that looks like this. It's going to be a fun episode that you don't want to miss, so let's check it out. What's up everybody? Welcome to another episode here at Blended Graphics. I'm Jason Ortega, and for today's episode, we're going to create something fun, and it's going to be a little bit different than what you're used to seeing from me. I have seen a lot of these fun styles from various artists that include these very busy scenes and settings that incorporate just a ton of objects just kind of scattered all over the place to create something really cool. And so that's going to be the main focus point for this picture here and what I wanted to accomplish with this image. And within this video, it's going to be a lot of reinforcement of some wonderful techniques, like blending is going to be a huge focus, but then the highlights and shadows. And essentially, we are taking this very dull and boring bedroom scene, and we are going to just add in all these fun effects to not only make everything blend really nice together, but just make it look really eye-popping and very visually stunning to the eye. So, before we get started here, I just want to say that if you are not already subscribed to this channel, go ahead and smash that subscribe button and hit that bell icon and stay notified for future video postings. And after watching this video, if you have any questions for me or anything that you want me to go into more detail with, be sure to hit me up in that comment section below. So, with all of that said, I think it is time that we jump over into our scene and let's get started with this image. So our canvas size here is 5,000 by 4,000 pixels. And the first thing that I'm doing right now is I just want to get all of our objects in place first, set the scene up, and then we can kind of take things from there. So I've already got my hands in place. I already selected them out so we can avoid that part. And right now we're going to move on to kind of our focal point a little bit, where we're going to start adding our TV stand, and then we're going to start getting all of those components added on there. All right, and then we can go ahead and hit Command T, and I'm just going to nudge these hands down just a little bit. All right, and I'm going to turn them off just so I can place the TV stand a bit better and not have the distraction of the hands in my way. Okay, so let's scale this down just a little bit here. And then we're going to turn the hands back on. So that looks pretty good. Let's turn the hands back off, and we're going to keep moving forward. I'm going to add this TV in here. And most of these elements are actually 3D assets from Envato Elements. And just having the access to those 3D objects is great, and being able to find the right perspective saves you a ton of time and hassle instead of trying to find that in pictures. So we're going to repeat the same stuff here. It's going to be really boring, so let's speed through this, and that way you can kind of see the process of my workflow. Okay, so this is pretty much our scene here in our basic layout. I'm just making some final touches right now, like moving this basketball over. I'm also adding the stormtrooper on the TV stand as well. Like I said, I'm trying to make this look as busy as possible because I think it's going to have a really neat effect in the end. And so I need to move this game console over a little bit. But like I said, we're just doing a little bit more adjustments before we move on. And I'm actually going to zoom in here a bit because I need to move down this console so that's actually touching the TV stand. Okay, so that looks good. What I'm actually going to do now is I'm not really happy with that baseball bat. So I'm going to jump over into the scene where I actually added a couple more posters and pictures instead on the wall. So I think this looks much better. I like that. Plus it fills up more space and we don't have as much negative space on that wall. So it kind of helps us in a couple of ways there. All right, let's go ahead and start our initial color grading process. And the first thing I'm doing is on that layer mask of our wall, I'm using the marquee selection tool to create a selection of this window. And then we're going to fill that layer mask with black. And then from here, I'm going to be using several different shades of blue. That's kind of the tones that I want to aim for. So I'm just trying to create a scene outside. Again, it's going to be a nighttime setting. That's going to help with a lot of those glowing effects going on inside the room. So I'm just kind of experimenting with different colors here. And now I'm just going to go back with my pen tool this time. Again, just create another selection. And all of these colors are on separate layers. But this time what I'm going to do is just find an even darker shade of blue. And we're going to just paint this up on the top here. And this is going to kick things off for us as far as color grading goes. Okay, and then once we have that, we can go ahead and deselect that. Perfect. Okay, so I'm just merging all of those sky layers together into one by pressing Command E. And now that we've got that outside setting and starting to set the tone of how I want the rest of this bedroom to go, what's going to make it easier for us in terms of the color grading process is we need to hide all of these objects. There's just so much going on right now, and that's just going to hurt things. So let's start off fresh here. And from here, we can go ahead and start this process. So I'm first going to add a hue and saturation adjustment layer. And so I've clipped it to our background, and I'm just using this hue slider just to kind of get a feel for the direction I want to go. But mainly, I just want to desaturate this room a little bit. And essentially what I want to do from here is get my marquee selection tool one more time. And then I'm just going to create a selection of just that bottom floor there. And on that layer mask, I'm filling that with black. I also lower the opacity quite a bit. That's why there was just this huge adjustment change there. So we're at like a 30% opacity right now. And I'm just making minor adjustments right now. But you're going to see this before and after of what we did. So yeah, we've desaturated quite a bit. And then I'm just painting back white on this ground since it's a bit too warm for my liking. Okay. All right, so now let's go ahead and start working with our lighting levels. We're going to go to a levels adjustment layer. And we're going to create some contrast. So we're going to bring in our shadows. We're going to bring in our highlights. You don't have to do this. I typically like to incorporate some contrast with my pictures, but that's just me. All right. And now from here, let's go ahead and add an exposure adjustment layer. And this is going to be our largest adjustment in terms of lighting. So we're lowering that quite a bit. But what we want to do is paint black on that layer mask on the right side because we want to give the impression that there's going to be this light source that we're not going to be able to see. But it's going to provide a cool effect for our room here. All right, at this moment now, we're going to slowly start to incorporate some of our objects and bring those back. But I'm going to go back to my hue and saturation adjustment layer and increase that opacity to 100%. And then in here, I'm just going to tweak this up a little bit just to give us a good foundation to build off of. That top ceiling, though, I am going to erase some of that. I want to bring back some of that original color so it's not so blue. Again, this is just going to be our foundation. I do have a hue and saturation adjustment layer that's going to be on top of all of this. And that's going to be our main layer in terms of the color and the color grading of this room. So we're in that one right now. It's in colorize. And we're just kind of moving this hue slider around just to kind of get the look that we want. So somewhere right around here is, I think, what I'm trying to target. So that looks good. And then we can invert that mask by pressing Command I and then just slowly start to paint some of this back in. Just try to make it as organic as possible. So it's up to you of how you want to paint some of this color back in. This is just my process for this. And now that I've sampled some of this pink on this neon light, we're going to start making this pop and shine just a little bit more as well. So right now we're just going around those edges and start to brighten that up a little bit. Same thing with that teal color, sampled that, and we're just going to make it glow. But as we're doing this process, just remember, less is more. You don't have to go crazy with this. Just subtle adjustments will be key. And what we're doing now is adding a hue and saturation adjustment layer. We're adding that into colorize, and we're going to try to match those pink tones because what we want to do is add that light that's going to be reflected off the wall. So somewhere right around here I think is a good color. Let's invert that mask. And then just, like I said, just right around that sign there, we're going to bring back some of that pink. We can always tone this down just a little bit. And in fact, that's what we're going to do now. Let's lower the opacity. Okay, so that is looking pretty good. We're now going to our lava lamp, and we're using this hue and saturation adjustment layer to transform that blue tone into something a little bit more green. I just kind of like that contrast in colors. So somewhere right around here, that will do it. I like it. And now at this point, we've got a good foundation for our color grading. Let's go ahead and bring back all of our objects. And then now we can take it from here. And now that I can see the big picture here, I'm going back to this hue and saturation layer, and we're just going to make it a little bit more purple. We can also bump up the saturation a little bit. And yeah, this is looking good. Let's turn off all those layers once more, except what we originally had. And we're also going to leave the window in hands, and we're going to start working with these hands first. All right, so we're going to use a hue and saturation adjustment layer, clip it to our hands by holding Alt or Option and clicking. And then what we want to do is go to our yellows and red channels, just those warmer tones. We want to desaturate those quite a bit. And now that we have that, let's go back to our master channel. And then the same thing there. Let's desaturate this. Excellent. Let's add a levels adjustment layer to, again, incorporate some contrast. And once we have that contrast in place, after this, the next step that we're going to do is add an exposure adjustment layer because our lighting is really bright. So we need to drop that down quite a bit. All right, so this will do it here. We want to make sure that that red light is going to glow. So I'm painting black on that exposure adjustment layer to bring that back. Cool. Let's go ahead and turn our direction towards the window. And let's drop the lighting levels on this with an exposure adjustment layer. And then let's use a hue and saturation adjustment layer to try and match those tones that's going on with our room. But right now you can see outside, it looks a little bit too dark. So we're going to add a solid color. And I'm just going to paint on top of this a little bit lighter blue here. So that way it kind of brightens that outside scenery up just a little bit. All right, so this is the part where things just get really tedious and repeating those same steps. We're going to do the same thing with our dresser this time, create some contrast, darken it up a little bit. And then we need to darken the top of that dresser up a little bit more. So I have another exposure adjustment layer where I've dropped the lighting, and I'm using this pen tool to create a selection of the top. And then let's fill that with white so we can bring back that dark color. Perfect. All right, so I'm just going to walk us through one more object, and that's going to be our stormtrooper. And that's mainly because we're going to have a little bit more highlight work with this to have that interaction with that light source that's off our screen. So we're first using an exposure adjustment layer to drop those lighting levels initially. And then we can go ahead and once we have that set, we're going to paint white to bring back some of that light just on that right side. Okay, and once we have that, we're going to use a levels layer. And we're just going to make our shadows just a bit darker, again, to create a bit more contrast. And then we can go back to our exposure adjustment layer. Just, again, tweak things up just a little bit here and try to be as accurate as possible. We will add a little bit more highlights later on, but this is going to give us a good starting off point and just help set us up for success later down the road. All right, our stormtrooper is looking great. But now it is time to do all of these same steps over and over again with all of our objects. I'm going to speed through this because it's going to take forever. So I'll be back with you in just a second. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I am back, and you can see that a lot happened here, but things are definitely coming together. Now that we've accomplished this, let's go ahead and focus on these hands. So the first thing that I did was I made a copy of that right hand, and just the selection of that right hand, I flipped it horizontally. And so you can see here, I've placed it over the left hand, and what I want to do is lower the opacity, and we can scale this up by pressing Command T, and I just want to align this up so that it fits well with this left hand. Obviously, that original left hand was so bright on that left side, and I don't have any light source coming from there. So I'm using my right hand to kind of darken this area up here. So you can see here, I've inverted the mask, and I'm just painting some of that hand back in. And I have a few of these copies, so we're going to do this a couple of times. There's, multitude of ways that you can get rid of that bright highlight. This just seemed like the easiest option for me since I already had that right hand that looked really good, and I wanted to match the tones as easy as possible, so that's the easiest way that we're doing that. And now you can see here, I've loaded in the copy. We're just doing the same thing over and over again, and we're just aligning that up with the layer mask. I'm inverting that by pressing Command I, and then just going over this thumb here to try to help eliminate a lot of that highlight. And as we're doing this, obviously just make sure that you're clipping those layers onto the original hand layers, so that way when you're actually inverting that mask and pinning it back, that you're not going past that hand boundary and that edge. So this way it keeps everything confined to where that hand placement is. All right, so this is gonna be our last copy that we're gonna use, and we're just doing the same thing. I'm just lining this up, but for this one, I actually wanna warp it and try to, kind of match the contour of the hand. And just to get there, all you have to do is right click on that selection, go to warp, and then you can just move around those anchors to help form that. Okay, so this is looking really good. And now our hands are in a good spot to go ahead and keep moving forward with this image. And I first went ahead and shut off my hands because I want to add more shadows. We already have a good amount in place, but we can clean this up a little bit more. So I'm in my background group. I've added another exposure adjustment layer, and we're going to go ahead and turn the lighting all the way down. I made sure to add this exposure adjustment layer underneath any of my color grading layers because I don't want to affect those tones. So now that I've inverted the mask, we're just going to go around and clean some of these areas up, add some more shadows to where, in real life they would be. So we're just taking our time with this, going underneath our shelf here, add a little bit under here. So like I said, we're just kind of polishing this up, trying to make it look more realistic than what it currently is. And we're just about done here. And let's go ahead and see what that before and after looks like. Yeah, so maybe at the time it doesn't quite seem like you're doing a lot, but when we do this before and after, you can see what a huge difference that makes. All right, let's go ahead and keep continuing on with adding shadows, and we're going to work with some of our objects on the ground. So the first thing that we're working with are these shoes. And we're doing the same thing of adding that exposure adjustment layer, turning that down, but instead of inverting the mask this time, I'm actually just going to go ahead and paint black on some of these areas because it is going to be on the facing opposite side of where that light source is, so it's going to be a little bit darker. And then we've added another layer underneath, and you saw that I sampled that color under our desk there, and we're just painting that underneath the shoes. And now we're working our way over to our laptop case and our hat. Same thing. We're just going to go around, like I said, to all of these different objects, cleaning them up a little bit, applying that same technique, primarily of using the exposure adjustment layer, turning that down, and then inverting the mask to paint some of this back in. All right, so we have just a few more objects to go. We're working on our Pikachu. Now we're doing the same thing with our guitar. And that'll pretty much be done once we kind of end things with this guitar here. Okay, so now that that's settled, we're going to go ahead and do the same thing with some of these objects on the wall. So starting with this first picture here by the neon sign, I'm just going to go ahead and do that method of just clicking, hold down the shift key, go to the other side and clicking again, so that way we are painting shadows in a straight line. And remember, less is more. You don't want to overdo it with this. It's not very thick, so you don't need to have a huge shadow going on here. All right, so let's speed through this. You've got the idea. I'll see you in a second. All right, so now that we've added those shadows, I actually want to go back and add a little bit more color grading to the ground because I wasn't really too impressed with how that was looking. So you see, all I did here was I just went ahead and added a color balance adjustment layer, clipped it to that group, and now I'm just matching the tones of what we already have going on in the room. So the magentas, the blues, sticking to those cooler tones. And you can see right now what a difference that makes by just adding that color balance adjustment layer. And there's the before and after. Yeah, it looks much, much better. Okay, cool. Let's keep pushing forward. We're going to add some more light and make some of these lights that we already have just a little bit brighter, make them pop. Okay, so we're going to first start on this right side here. I just went ahead and sampled the color on the wall and just found a little bit brighter tone. And I'm using a soft round brush here just to paint some more light on the right side. Okay, and then we can even condense this brush tip a little bit, add a little bit more. So that looks pretty good. And we can change the color to match that neon sign so we can add a little bit more glow to that sign. I'm a big fan of contrast, so I do like to have some of my bright points even brighter and, go ahead and decrease some of those shadows to make them a little bit darker. All right, so just a couple more left. We are working on the lava lamp right now, and that's looking really good, but we can actually go ahead and turn down that opacity just a little bit. And then we're going to finish things off with this controller, just that little red bar up top. Okay, so that looks really good, and since we just completed those shadows, it is now time to do the opposite, and we're going to add some highlights. So we're starting with this laundry bin, and there are so many different techniques that you can use to add highlights. The technique I'm using is I'm just adding a blank layer using one solid color and just painting the highlight on myself. When I'm working on edges, a lot of the time I like to use a soft round brush at 100% opacity, paint just on the edge so that way it just lightly introduces some of that color. And then as we go further into the laundry bin there, I'm lowering the opacity. And now that we're on our Stormtrooper, same technique, doing the same thing. Since that light is primarily coming on the right side, we're just going to make sure that that looks nice, crisp and clean, and those bright spots are bright. So you know how this technique goes. Let's go ahead and speed through this, and I'll be back with you in just a second. Alright guys, I am back, and this is pretty much going to wrap up this tutorial. So right now things look really good with this room. If you want to take it a step further and want to keep, adding these little adjustments, you can. If you want to make it more saturated, that's totally up to you. It's going to be all about personal preference from here on out, but I do like the way things are looking right now. But anyways guys, thank you so much for checking out this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you are feeling inspired from this video and you want to make your own room scene, there's so much things that you can do and all these really fun elements that you can incorporate it. But if you do decide to make one, feel free to tag me on Instagram at Blended Graphics. I would love to check out your compositions as well and see what you've come up with. If you'd like to see something like this again in the future, maybe a different scene and put a new twist on it, just let me know down there in that comment section, and who knows, maybe we'll do something like this again in the future. Alright guys, the time has come. Thanks again for dropping by, and as always, hope to see you again for our next video. In the meantime, please take care and hope to see you soon.